Zainab, Josh, and I are excited to be here from the Mongoose team, and we've got an awesome group of panelists that we're sure you're going to be able to hear a lot from today. One of the things we want everybody to really keep in mind as well is be active in the chat today. We'd love to hear your thoughts and insights as well. We want to make this as collaborative as possible. But today we're really going to be focusing on how institutions are leveraging Slate and Mongoose together. We really view it as different workflows that can supercharge your messaging out of what you're already doing with your CRM. For our webinar today, please use the chat again for any of those comments throughout the session. Any questions that you've got, use that Q&A. There are in the chat as well. Josh is going to be actively manning that. But we're also recording the session, so it'll be sent out to you. And then if you've got colleagues you want to share it with as well, we'd love you to send that their way. Please make sure to engage with us on social media using that hashtag Mongoose. We always love to hear from our partners and are excited to see all the good things that you continue to do with Mongoose. I am joined by Zainab, who is one of our client success managers here at Mongoose, and then Josh, who is in our support department. My name is Mike Seaman. I am a lead account manager here, been with Mongoose for just over 4 years. But before that, I was on campus for 7 years, 2 in intercollegiate athletics, and then 5 in enrollment, where I was a Slate captain. So when I got tapped into this, I'm super excited. I always like going back to my admissions roots and talking all things Slate. And I know you're going to learn a lot from our panelists as well. Josh, I'm going to send it over to you first here because you also have some Slate experience.
Yeah, big lover of Slate here as well. I am Josh, product support specialist. I actually see some names that I recognize that I've worked with some people with your Slate integrations, which is great for you all to be here and excited to chat with you. I have about a decade of experience in admission prior to coming to Mongoose, and 3 of the 4 institutions I've worked at were Slate clients. So a lot of experience using different types of Slate as well. And I will be in the chat answering your questions. So like Mike said, please feel free to use that and we will continue to engage with you there. Over to you, Zainab.
Thanks, Josh. I am Zainab. I am the client success manager here at Mongoose. I've been here for a little bit over a year, but prior to that, I spent majority of my time in enrollment management, admissions and recruitment, strategic partnerships, 12 years doing the admissions work at mostly at a 2-year public institution here in New Jersey, and then a 2-year private institution in Philadelphia, and also working for the state in the higher education department. So really excited to see this side of it and then be a partner with you guys here today.
Thanks, Zainab. And a little bit of a brief preview of who our panelists are going to be. Lori, Tony, and Brandon. You're going to hear from them all here in a second with a little bit more in depth on who they are and the institutions they're from. But wanted to make sure you knew who from kind of the campus side is going to be joining us today. Our agenda, we've covered our welcome. That's the first part we've gotten out of the way. Really want to talk through some pieces on our presentation of all that data that you're moving in from Slate into Mongoose, how we can turn that into different action. We're going to talk to our panelists about their real workflows, their best practices, things that they're actively doing to kind of enhance Slate, and then also an open Q&A. At any point in time, ask those questions in that Q&A section. Josh will answer live, but we'll also have time at the end for our panelists to field some live questions. So a big thing that we look at here is Slate's kind of where your data is living. But when you want to turn that data into that effective and timely communication, that's where a lot of teams are struggling. And that's where Mongoose can really come in and supercharge what you're doing out of Slate as your CRM. So leveraging both systems together can have a really big impact on your enrollment strategy, things we really want to drill into today. Again, Mongoose is maximizing Slate. Here's a quote from Brian. He's a VP of enrollment at Dutchess Community College. He's been a long-term partner of Mongoose and has been a huge champion of kind of the connection between the two systems. I know, Zainab, you work very closely with Brian here. Wanted to make sure that you all could see this. And if you've got similar thoughts or ways that you view Slate and Mongoose together, we'd love to see that in the chat here also. So enough about the slides, though. We want to get into our roundtable discussion. So I'm going to stop my share here and want you to hear from our panelists directly. So I'm going to turn it over to them with our first question and really focus in on learning a little bit more about their roles and what their team is using Slate and Mongoose for today. So Tony, I'm going to kick it your way first and would love for you to start us off here with telling a little bit more about your role and how you're using Slate and Mongoose in tandem.
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Tony Rudolph. The Associate Director of Admissions now at SUNY Alfred State College of Technology. I've been in higher ed for, 18 years, 9 years at Alfred State. I am our sole Slate captain and really the only person who knows how it works. And I was the person who implemented Mongoose. I worked with your team previously at another institution and was very happy to bring you to Alfred State as well.
Awesome.
Just want to warn everyone, if you lose me, it's because my school is currently under tornado watch. So I apologize, but hopefully it'll last the hour.
And the wind behind him in his background is not from the tornado. I think that's just on that virtual background, but we'll be mindful of that too, Tony. Brandon, I'm going to ask you that same question then, if you'd tell us a little bit more about your role and how you're using Slate today.
Yeah. Well, my name is Brandon Wente. I am an Associate Director of Admission and Regional Recruiter for Concordia College up in Moorhead, Minnesota. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and do a lot of kind of remote work with our team and kind of a lot of the recruiting around this area. But I was part of the search team as we were looking to add a texting platform around like 2017. We were working with Salesforce as a CRM at that point. And then when we switched to Slate in about 2023, was really kind of advocating for keeping Mongoose and like that as our texting platform in that time period. We use Mongoose really primarily for very conversational, like relationship building aspects, really trying to focus in on how we can kind of build conversations and kind of keep those conversations going throughout the full recruitment cycle.
Awesome. And I know we've worked kind of previously when I was managing some territories in Minnesota, and I'm always amazed at the way that your team's able to connect through Mongoose and the reply rates and everything that you have. So it's working out well.
Yeah, our reply rates are typically in like the mid to like low 30s or so, 30%. So like feeling really good about kind of where students are at and how they're sort of engaging with us through the platform.
Awesome. And Lori, same question to you then, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about your role and using Mongoose and Slate together.
Yeah, of course. My name is Lori Cookhook. I'm the Director of Enrollment Services at Lynn University in Boca Raton, Florida. I was actually a Mongoose customer. I brought Mongoose to Lynn probably about 10 years ago now. Before we migrated and implemented Slate, we became a Slate partner in 2019, went live with the spring of 2020 intake. Right at the perfect time, when COVID hit. So we were in Slate and ready to keep moving and working and doing things. Because if we had still been in our old system, it would have been an absolute nightmare. But yeah, we've been using Mongoose for quite a long time. And we've recently transitioned our counselor one-to-one outreach into the Slate SMS platform. But we still utilize Mongoose heavily for event communications and event outreach, it's utilizing the max speed inbox as well, and some broader admission related tactics where my team, the communication team, does the more one-to-one outreach, as opposed to our admission counselors building that relationship, certain communication strategies that we're doing. So we tend to use Mongoose more from a mass texting platform for us, but it's certainly been working well and been super beneficial for us to keep both platforms working in tandem together.
Awesome.
All right, thanks, guys. So before you were using both platforms together, what communication challenges were you trying to solve? And Tony, I'm going to ask you first.
Sure. Number one for me was deliverability. When we were working exclusively on Slate, I had a lot of challenges with going through the A2P compliance process. We happened to be part of SUNY, the largest system in the United States, and we all share one EIN number, which basically means that the systems were recognizing us as one whole unit instead of an individual campus. But all of my information, all my data was based on my campus. So it was very challenging. Switching to Mongoose completely flipped that. We went from a 16 to above a 90 overnight by working with Mongoose. That completely changed our entire strategy and certainly our success.
Awesome. Yeah. I appreciate that feedback, especially with that process that you have to go through to kind of get everything up and running. And Brandon, do you have any feedback about what some of the challenges that you were trying to solve prior to connecting both platforms?
Yeah. So before we had Mongoose, we did have like a brief stint with a different texting platform that really wasn't built for two-way communication. It was more for like blast outreach to students. And so we were seeing a lot of issues with being able to like maintain a conversation, having that built into like our CRM integration so that we can track messaging and like what works and what doesn't and different things like that. And so that was kind of our main motivation for starting to have something that would allow us to, really kind of build those relationships with students. And that's where Mongoose came in for us. As we moved to Slate, I think it was really important that we kept that rapport with students. We made a mid-year transition into Slate, and so we didn't want to have to like change numbers and lose conversation records and different things like that. We really wanted to make sure that we were building on those relationships that I think were most important for us, which is why like Mongoose has really been kind of important to kind of keep with Slate as we've moved forward.
A mid-year transition to anything is not easy, but a mid-year transition to a CRM is something that I never personally want to be a part of. So the way that you navigated it too, it's in the rearview mirror, which is a good thing.
Yes, yes.
As a follow-up to that, Brandon, when you were evaluating your kind of different ways to communicate with your students, looking at Mongoose alongside of Slate, what were some of those key elements that you needed to have to move forward?
Really, I think it was like more about the usability and that our admission rep team, like Slate has a really big lift in terms of like just kind of learning some new technology, some new vocabulary, some new everything with like a CRM. And Mongoose, because everyone was already very adept at like, finding their students in that system and making sure that like data was coming through in a meaningful way. They could kind of like have a bit of consistency through that transitional period. So that was kind of the most important part of that was that we had a technology system that folks were already familiar with, and then that was just one less thing to worry about, and then we could still keep those relationships going with students.
Yeah. And I know, Laura, you mentioned kind of Mongoose was part of that communication strategy before you transitioned to Slate. When looking at that, what were some of those things that said, yep, we got to keep both of them?
Yeah, I think, Brandon hit it right on the head. It was like, that transition period, we know in, enrollment management, it's not just a 1 year and done, you cultivate students, for 18, 24 months, however long that is. So not losing those touch points and the number that they're familiar with, if they saved it into their phone and, trying to do that and getting people in and other things. I mean, it was like, people had business cards printed with phone numbers on it and then trying to change midstream and, having to do, 15 plus recruiters while they're traveling, all of those types of things. Business card wasn't the be all end all for the not changing, for as long as we did, but it was trying to simplify things for our admission counselor. So they had one system, within Slate to, manage all of their communication, but then also still having a backup. If, students aren't responding to a message from one phone number, guess what? They still have access to Mongoose. They can go in and, send out a blast from another number. And they're like, look at the responses I got on this side as well. So and if one system goes down, you have a backup too. So, it was never about getting rid of one and moving solely to the other. It was how to use both of them in tandem to get, the best results and to get the students, 6 ways to Sunday, hit them once, hit them twice, hit them with different numbers so that we can, hopefully encourage them and engage with them and, to, click through and see the messages that we were sending.
Yeah, that's really great. You're bringing me back to all my admissions days of working through those funnels. And so trying to get the students to read and answer the questions is just part or half the battle, right? Trying to get them to connect with you. And just talking about that, the student journey and how you're utilizing Slate. Tony, can you talk a little bit about what is one workflow or campaign that you've utilized when you're combining Slate and Mongoose together to help work through that student journey?
Sure. I think a combination of our open house and admitted student day outreach was probably the best example. we had a ton of success this year, and we've been successful the last several years, but the growth that we saw, the change we saw this year was substantial. And I think it was due to the series of smart messages that I created. I used varied language with different variables, partly done manually, pulling things from Slate, but really handled primarily through the smart message system in Mongoose. If a student said yes, we were able to send them short link with a simple registration form, just get them on the list. If they said no, we would then follow up with generic links, but really still pushing them for different types of visits. And in the end, our growth was, as I said, very substantial. I think that we saw a massive growth, especially in our admitted student day, which frankly, before this year, we were starting to question whether or not these were going to be successful on their own. And now it's actually, well, how do we do more of this next year? Because we couldn't accommodate everyone this year. We had students on a wait list for almost every single event.
Wow, that's great. We love to hear that. Always a wait list or trying to get them in. And then for Brandon and Lori, same question. What is one thing that you can think of as part of your workflow or campaign that you're using when you're combining Slate and Mongoose as part of that student's journey?
I mean, I think Tony, you said it, right. With the event communication, trying to get those registered people, ultimately, I've tried to kind of change the mindset of people. It's not always about the number of RSVPs. It's about the number of actual attendees when, a virtual event, comes to pass. I'm great. I have 300 RSVPs, but if only 100 show up, it's still 100 more than I would have had if I didn't have the event. But if I could have 200 show up, even better if I had 50 RSVPs. So it's a lot. We use it for every virtual event that we have, dovetailing it with, traditional email communication. We know it's about, especially from a student perspective, it's the instant gratification of having it on their phone, picking up something and seeing it. Well, they've got emails on their phone, but there's something about a text message. Even if they're not going to do something about it, odds are they're going to see the preview or maybe click in. They might not click on the link in the message, but they'll open it and read it. Even just, I think it was today's Thursday. So Monday, we have a virtual pre-orientation for our incoming parents in about a month's time. First email communication went out. Great. It's posted on some pages. We have, let's call it, we had like 75 RSVPs so far. We're still, we've got plenty of time. I sent a text message out to those incoming parents. Within 4 hours, I more than doubled the number of RSVPs that I had. So parents are just as responsive to text messages as the students are as well. So now it's rethinking how we do communication to parents. How do we utilize text more with parents? Is it invasive? Is it not invasive? But everybody has a smart device somewhere, around them, and text messages are just as prevalent as email these days. So I'm finding more and more ways to use it and for different types of things to try and get people buy-in.
Yeah, I definitely have to get the parents involved because it's a family decision. It's never about the student anymore. It's definitely a family decision.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then Brandon as well. And what is one campaign or workflow that you're working through with the student's journey, and how are you using Slate and Mongoose together?
Yeah, so we have sort of in Slate, we have an internal scoring system that admission reps will assign to students. We call it like our affinity rankings. And so like how much have they been engaged with us throughout the year? Have they been visiting campus? Did they show up at our high school visits? Those types of things. And then one of my favorite projects to do is at the end of the cycle, when I have my students that are pretty like low scoring on that list, if they haven't really been engaged with me, despite, the number of emails and texts and different things, I like to send them a smart message through Slate. So kind of tying both answers together here, but sending them this like a smart message through Slate that says like on a 1 through 5 scale, like how interested in Concordia are you still? Like where does it kind of fall on that list? And so when they reply back like 5, I'm still interested and I'm ready to deposit, or 1, you can cancel my file. It really it gives them that like low commitment, but still like a high amount of engagement from me to give them a quick response back that says like, so sorry to see you go. Here's what you need to know about us canceling your file. Or, hey, that's great. Here's the steps that you need to take to put in that admission deposit. So it still kind of gives them that engagement kind of through that process.
Yeah, we love a smart message.
Our messages, we see on average like a 5-time higher reply rate than our typical messaging. So yeah, keep using them and getting value out of them. It definitely pushes those students and parents to do what you want them to do. Lori, I know kind of in a previous conversation, we talked a little bit about data, and Slate being really a treasure trove of data and having a whole bunch of information in there. When you look at that different data, the different triggers, population processes, all of that that's in Slate, what's most important to bringing into your workflows for Mongoose?
I mean, I guess it depends, as most people, time of year, what the strategy is at the moment, whether it's an event outreach or, a deadline. I never like to use, text messages solely for deadline communications. Like, it's it looks like, desperate, a last ditch effort. Like you've never gotten another text message, but now I'm going to tell you about our early action deadline or something like that. So it's a combination of all of those multiple data points and having, the queries set up that you need in Slate that can bring that information, over to Mongoose. We tend to do for some of our larger virtual events, we will, for all of those who are sometimes just registered, but even those who aren't, who've gotten the previous messages before, we'll do a drop, for people who've, been engaging with the emails who just haven't taken, those actions. So looking at, opens and reads and other interaction, points that we, find valuable, we'll do a max speed text drop, 2 minutes before the start of a program, saying, hey, we're live now. Here's the link. Just hop in and join us when you're ready. Not necessarily we're going to be live at 5 o'clock tonight and it's 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Click this link to register. Then you're going to get an email with a link, all of those things. We just try to, let's, call a spade, take out the middleman and just be like, hey, we're live. Here's the link. Join us on Zoom. So it's those timing pieces, to the right population at the right time. And again, that's where I find, the uptick in attendees. It's those messages that drop, right when we're going live on air or even 3 minutes after, if they don't show up on time, that's okay. They got here 5 minutes late. They're still getting all the content we wanted. So it's having the ability to send out that many messages in such a short amount of time for us, in conjunction with the data triggers that we pull out of Slate has been just amazing for us.
We actually had an event that happened this past year where we sent out the wrong Zoom link and we had about 50 people that were like going to the wrong location. And so able to take the text numbers out of Slate really quickly, build a segment, send them the new link, and then get like a good number of that population back into like the actual, the Zoom link that we were prepared for. So it was a really quick sort of like 2-minute sort of troubleshooting and back online in the event.
And Brandon, I love in particular that texting was your first thought with that, because if you would have sent that as an email, maybe one student might have taken a look to see if they had the right Zoom link, but that text, they 100% had their phone right with them and knew that that was a way that they could get in and got that information to them quickly. I guess I'll ask Tony this next question. When we're looking at what's changed for your students since you've leveraged Mongoose for your communication through text messaging, what are one or two of those things that you've seen really a change on that front?
The speed of responses is definitely a big piece. Not only is Mongoose just a really effective way for us to know what track, having the app on the phone to see that responses come in, all of that, but your advice, your team's advice to us on how quickly to respond, what the expectations are. Hearing that from somebody that isn't me made my team a little bit more responsive to that recommendation. When we say the student is expecting to hear back from you within an hour, I can say that my team just thinks that's my expectation of them. Having your team reinforce that is really valuable. And then, of course, with that deliverability issue I started with at the top of all this, the fact that the messages are actually reaching them and not getting blocked by the carrier, obviously is a huge change.
Awesome. And for everybody on the call, your customer success manager is always happy to pull that information and be that second voice for you. And I know, Tony, you get to work with Zainab in particular, but everybody on the call, for sure, reach out to your customer success managers if you need that. And we are always happy to be your second voice to get that information over.
And every time I meet with Zainab, she provides the quarterly data. I share it with my team, and we have conversations about what's lacking and what can be improved, or just successes, which this last quarter we had some huge successes. So
And if
very
you haven't
important.
had a chance to do one of those, again, reach out. Zainab can be a great resource for those and making sure that she's able to present that to you in a way that your team will find benefit from.
Yeah, I love going over the data with everybody and really just connecting with you all and finding out great strategies on how to use both systems together, but also just how to communicate with your students. I think part of this higher ed geek in me just comes out working here in Mongoose, so I still get to keep that part going. So I'm always here as a resource for you as well. Tony, I'm going to keep it to you for one more, and then talking about your outcomes, right? The data that comes from all the things that we've talked about prior to, what are some like great wins? I know you had talked about your admitted student day, but is there something that really sticks out recently that you really want to celebrate?
I mean, it really is that event data. We've been going over this. One of our biggest initiatives this year is increasing the number of visitors to campus, especially amongst our admitted students. Obviously, everyone knows if you get the admitted student on campus, the odds of them enrolling is significantly higher. So I actually was just looking at this and going over it with my vice president. Overall, we have, as of this week, we've seen 6% growth in all of our campus visits, but admitted student day registrations were up 16%. And it wasn't just the RSVP. I actually like Lori's point about those registrations. It was also the actual attendance that went up, I believe, about 11% over the previous year. And anecdotally, we have a unique structure where we actually show two different campuses at our open houses. They're about 20 minutes apart. And where you start your day depends on what major you're in. Being able to text students to say, please start here, here's the address, that changed a lot for us. And the amount of students that actually got that message and started their day at the right location was significantly improved this year. And it just makes for a better day for them. And of course, they're much happier. Went on to our application numbers were way up from that population, and our enrollment has gone up from that population.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, always having them on campus, also just having them connect with everybody is also very helpful. I'm going to ask Brandon and Lori actually the same question. We want you to kind of brag about something and really shout out what are your successes so far and what you've seen in just the immediate last couple months.
Well, so we just did our quarterly meeting with Amy, who's our success lead. And as I kind of alluded to at the beginning, I think our biggest successes just come from those reply rates. We typically see like some really strong engagement with students simply because we're utilizing a lot of like the different strategies that you all like to promote, like ending with questions and having students have a reason to respond back to us. So that we have, ways that we can kind of keep getting in front of them, keep getting into their inboxes.
And I think, looking at reply rates is good, but I also, try to temper expectations with our campus visit team, as well, when we're doing, large outreach for our virtual events or for some of our specific admitted student sites and resources that we have. You get the no's, you get the opt-outs, you get the polite no's, you get the sometimes impolite responses that, tell people that they no longer want to get text messages. We did a couple campaigns, again, earlier this week. This week was a really good week. I'm sorry, I got to brag about this, but we sent out to several populations, 3 messages over the course of, it was Monday and Tuesday, I think. Not one opt-out, not one stop, not one unsubscribe. I was like checking, the inbox to go, did the message go out? Was there something, did I not see something? Because you don't really see those numbers tick in, or at least some sort of response or something. I didn't get any likes. I didn't get any positive comments. It was more of a click here and, check this out type of thing. But the fact that I got no unsubscribes over the course of 3 campaigns, I couldn't believe it. So I take that as a huge win for the week. I bragged about my team. We had a full staff meeting this morning. I was like, guys, you have no idea how, I geek out about this. I was like, you have no idea how happy this makes me. So that was a huge win for us.
Yeah, those opt-outs, they're scary a little bit, but I mean, at least you're engaging with your students and they're connecting with your staff. And so they're connecting with Lynn University, and it sounds great.
Absolutely.
And all 3 of your institutions do an excellent job of engaging your students. And very, very low reply or very, very low opt-out rates we see from all of you, which is great. Reply rates are high, Brandon. We know that. But I know also institutions are looking for tools that are providing them value, and it's clear that Mongoose continues to provide that value. But what story or anecdote might you have of how exactly Mongoose and Slate alongside together provide that value for the institution in your efforts in enrollment? And Brandon, I'll start with you.
I think the first thing that comes to mind is just really that like students have such a mind for like what is a real message that's coming to me? Is there a real person behind this? And so some of the times when like if we send out these mass messages, trying to find ways that students will engage with the message, even if they think it's a bot, and then reminding them through the process of like, nope, I'm a real admission rep and I'm really the person that's here to help you. And I think that there are ways that you can utilize those smart messages because yes, it's like an automated process, but then to build that confidence with your students that like there is a real person reading these so that you maybe get fewer of those like, hey, maybe this is a response that they didn't think was going to be seen by human eyes. And so we can really start to build some of those other kind of components along the way too.
I think all the time we see students not expecting there to be an actual person on the other side. When you can call them out on that, their tone changes drastically.
Yes.
Lori, I'd love any insight you might have on this one too, of what you're seeing value-wise.
Yeah, of course. And I just had to chuckle with Brandon saying, you get those, are you a real person? Is this a bot? And then you respond and then you actually, start engaging with the students. 'Cause like I said, it's my team on the Mongoose side, the communications team who is responding to those messages. So those are always fun to see those come through. But I think it's the strategy that I've tried to build over the past couple of years. Mainly, I'll talk about like our admitted student site. We drop all of this new content to keep them engaged, to help that summer melt, keep them, fun little tidbits of things. And we always send emails and remind them about that. We have social media posts and things, but for every new post drop, we do a text message drop alongside of it as well. Again, they'll get emails to their phone, they'll see the ads delivered on social, but there's something about that text message landing in, that SMS folder in their phone to just be like, hey, check this out. And, we also we try to dangle carrots, we're like, hey, we're giving away some swag this month. So make sure you come and check us out. The number of entry forms that we get when we see a text drop with that swag giveaway is just incredible. Multiple entries per student, multiple entries per parent, just the numbers just keep ticking and ticking, down the sheet. So I think it's not just a one and done text message. It's using it in tandem with, the social strategy and with the email strategy. It's, building it all together and not having timing is key, not having everything drop at the same time, same day, every week, all of that type of thing. So just seeing, and we look at, we work with Mongoose for so long, we know the data points, right? When they hit, how they're hitting, what are those reply rates or those open rates, and just seeing what works best for us. We've seen the trends where we have better open rates on, Tuesday afternoons versus, the Monday mornings. I think everybody would know, those differences, but just seeing those data points and really translating into that, full blown communication strategy and making sure that text messaging, whether it's mass text or one-to-one text is really key and, very, very well thought out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having that as part of your broader communication strategy and such an integral part of that workflow speaks volumes to the thought that you're putting into how you're communicating with your students, and it's working.
So, I have a question about your teams, right? Because if you as a whole and your departments didn't have Mongoose, right? This is like, don't want to think this way, but if you didn't have Mongoose, what would be harder to manage? What would be harder for your teams to control or to handle during your regular day-to-days or during really busy time periods like, enrollment timelines and ad drops and things like that? And so, Laura, I'm going to have you answer that question first since you're already on with us.
Yeah, I mean, it's if we didn't have it, things would be drastically different. It's, people have become accustomed to doing that. Uh, I mean, gone are the days of picking up phones and making those outbound phone calls. I mean, we had our last student who was part of our calling program. He hung on. In all good conscience, I just couldn't drop him in his last semester of his senior year. He was the only one here. So he had a very particular population of students he was doing. I think, we'd have to kind of rethink our whole strategy. Is it, counselors, I mean, we'd still text, but is it counselors sitting there, with their phones in their hand and doing one-to-one messages that way? Or obviously we have Slate to do that, but things would look a lot different if we didn't have, the texting capabilities that we do now. And I'm glad I don't have to think about that.
Yeah, I know. It's like a nightmare, but we're not, we have to, but we don't want to see, like a what if situation. Brandon, what about you? What would happen? What would you think would not get done maybe?
I think about like just as I said before, one of the reasons why we've kept Mongoose through like our different CRM changes was just that consistency and being able to like eliminate one less hurdle of like technology changes so that we have some comfortability, some way that we know that we can always get in front of students. So I think if that went away, it would just be like another one of those learning curves that would just slow down the relationship building. Or going back to like, my example of how I'm, kind of working with those less engaged students kind of toward the end of the year. I don't think that, they would continue to probably not engage, and I wouldn't be able to necessarily do the same level of like smart messaging or the same level of just getting them to get like that one quick reply in or something like that. So those would be kind of the two areas that I see the most.
Yeah, maybe some loss of seats, because we're losing that that last stitch. I know we don't want to do last stitches all the time, but some of that communication comes from, those smart messages and things like that. So Tony, and as well, like what would be harder for you and your team to manage if you did not or were not able to utilize Mongoose?
This is really easy for me because this was our problem just 2 short years ago. There were days when I had teams of 4 or 5 staff doing nothing but responding to text messages. We would send out an invite for one of our large events or something like that, and the responses would come through so heavy and so rapidly that that's all they could do for hours. There would be nights when I would go home at the end of the day and I would sit on my laptop at home responding to text messages until 10, 11 o'clock, just trying to meet the students where they are and get those messages out there, knowing how damaging it could be to ignore some messages. That's all gone. The smart message system alone has brought our reply rate to a much better place than I ever thought possible, giving my staff a huge space to breathe. It's made all the difference, and I'll never go back.
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely have to turn off the computer at the end of the day or try to at least, because the students will text you at all hours.
And I love, Tony, too, that your staff has embraced those smart messages and that automation that still feels really personal. They're excelling at it. And it's definitely a great way to continue to reach out to your students, but also take some of that burden off of your staff to reply at 9 o'clock at night. The platform could already do it. Before getting into our final question that I've got, that's more of a future-facing one, I'd love to remind everybody that we will have some time at the end for Q&A with our panelists. So if you do have any questions, make sure you're putting them in the chat. Josh is sending them over to us as we're getting them. We want to make sure that you're able to have your questions answered directly too. Also, to this question I'm about to ask our panelists, I'd love any insight from everybody else on this call too, if you wouldn't mind dropping some responses in. But Tony, I'll start with you since you finished our last one. For the future, where do you see kind of AI automation or what Mongoose is doing with conversation intelligence fitting into the enrollment work that's happening on campus? And I know AI is all over with everybody where they're at with it on campuses, but would love to get your take on those specific things.
I think this counts as AI. I've become almost a little obsessive about watching the emotional response on the dashboard, wanting to get a sense when it's not going well. I like to kind of dive into why that might be. I do foresee us using that in how we approach the tone of our messages. We've already done some of that, lightened up some of the messaging, tried to make it sound a little more personal. There's nothing you can do about a student who's just not happy with the data that you're giving them, the information you're giving them, it doesn't meet their expectations. But there's a lot to be said for how you approach those conversations. And I think that that can help quite a bit. And then more enhancements to smart messages. I mean, we're in an area where chatbots are running everything. So I could see smart messages just growing, being able to go a little bit deeper, and maybe even incorporate more of that tone element into smart message responses. I don't think we ever want to get away from it sounding like you're talking to a person versus a bot, but again, softening some of that tone, especially if things aren't going well in the conversation.
Awesome. And Brandon, I'd love if you could add any feedback on there too, of kind of where you see AI automation or like that dashboard Tony was just talking about, moving enrollment into the future.
Yeah, I think like as we look at some of those different like the dashboards, the emotional response, how students are sort of feeling about their messages, it actually started to play into how we influence some of those like internal ranking systems that I mentioned before. But just being able to, like, if there was like an exact score that we got through like the Mongoose texting element of like, hey, how can that number really influence like what I would be telling our leadership team, who are the ones that are kind of looking at some of the different rankings and different ways that we're engaging with those students. So, and then, yeah, as Tony mentioned, just being able to look more at like some of the smart messages that still complement those elements too.
Awesome. And Lori, we'll finish out with you here, kind of on your take for the future.
Yeah, no, I think I mean AI and the different AI agents that are out there is certainly playing a role. And if people are saying, oh, they don't use AI, it's honestly, what do you miss? Why not at this point? That there's only so many hours in the day and so many messages you can write from a communication plan standpoint. So utilizing those tools to be even more personalized, more individualized, but basing on this segment, you know to do one-to-one texting, in at scale is impossible, for a single human to do. So, utilizing that and utilizing, the information, the feedback that Mongoose gives us, with the emotional, dashboard and all of that, toning messages down and, speaking to students as students, yeah, a bot helped you write it, but, being a more, putting a more personalized face on that. But, I just, some people come to me like, oh, we need to do all of this. We need to send all of these messages out. Look at what I did. I'm like, the goal is not to increase the number of communications that you're doing because you can write them at a faster clip. Yeah, AI can put this together, but it's not more. It's doing it better. It's doing it smarter. It's thinking about what we're doing and making it more meaningful and applicable to the population at hand, not just to bombard them with more messages because we can write them in, 30 seconds.
Absolutely. That intentionality behind it still needs to be there, that personal connection. Just blasting messages to blast messages really has never worked out, and you're still thinking about it the exact right way.
Exactly.
Well, again, to the three of you, we really appreciate you taking the time to walk through some of this with us all today. I know we do have a couple of questions that have come in from our participants here. I know the first one specifically is for you, Lori. I know you mentioned parent texting and the way that you're going about parents and having conversations with them. And Tony and Brandon, if you also are texting parents, would love your insight here. But how do you get your parents to opt in for texting? Is there any way you can elaborate on that texting strategy or what you're specifically doing for parents?
Yeah, on certain forms, obviously on the application and some uh, inquiry forms across different platforms. When we do ask, we don't always ask for parent information because sometimes, shorter forms are better to get more student information. So when we do ask for the parent information, we have the caveat on there, if you provide a mobile number, you are, saying that you are open to text messages. We have them doing it that way as opposed, opting in that way as opposed to opting out, on the back end later on. Some people are still like, well, how did they do that? Why did you text me? Well, your kid gave us your phone number. So sorry about that. You can't help it if we get the number and there was no, control around that. But we are very intentional with the messages that we are sending to parents, especially before the application stage as well. If we got their name and their phone number, it was for a particular reason. So we try not to abuse, that privilege.
And do any of you store parent contacts separately in Slate, or do you have them all kind of as associated records on that student record?
For us, it's, definitely the relationship
Yeah.
tag.
Same with the relationship tag. We don't pull the parent information into Mongoose yet. But we will, like, I've had parents who will see like my texting number in my email signature and will text me that way. So I still have like those contacts that will come in more on like a one-off basis.
Gotcha. Where they've got your texting number, they can reach out to you and you're still able to respond back and forth to them.
We have one more question that I think is interesting and would hear your thoughts on is what is your biggest student communication challenge right now? So you guys are talking a lot about your apply rates and everybody's talking to you, but what are some challenges that you're having with your students? And this goes for the chat too. If you're thinking of anything, you can throw that in there as well. But what are some challenges that you all are facing with your students?
I mean, I could say at this point, given the time of year, it's documents, it's to-do lists, it's, the final things that they need before orientation in August. We do everything that we can, to help other departments on campus too, whether it's housing forms, health forms, financial aid forms, you name it. We will use Slate as, our source of truth, because we have the most updated information before it goes into the SIS. But we'll pull out to make sure that number one, we're still communicating to our deposited students or our registered students, not somebody who's withdrawn, but another system hasn't been updated. But we'll use, Slate, Mongoose, our admission counselors to reach a particular group of students for a particular task every week. These people haven't submitted XYZ form. So we're going to focus on that this week. It's those last minute things to get those students done and ready to get here in August and not have to wait in long lines at orientation, because then that just pisses everybody off too, because why did I get, I'm standing here doing all of this stuff. So we're using every means of communication possible to get people squared away for August.
Brandon or Tony?
Yeah, I'll say a problem I didn't anticipate. We've been obsessed with the idea of every new generation now being net natives. We assume that they have these capabilities that they may not have. So simple things like logging into our single sign-on system is actually a problem for them. If they have single sign-on saved on their device, they're not reading the error message. They don't know what's going on, why it's not working. So we will have hundreds of students come back to us and say, well, it's not letting me log in. It's telling me my login doesn't work. They'll send us an error message where it clearly says that their Gmail or something like that is what's being used, even though we've said you have to use the credentials we gave you. So we're constantly trying to do that. And actually, this is one area where the AI is going to be really valuable, because any kind of chatbot can rectify this for us and just explain, here's how to do this, without us having to manually tell every student, here's how to do this.
Yeah.
I think similarly, just with like how we're sending students those like lists of things to do over the summer. And it's really hard to condense that into like a small text. And so what I'll do is I'll send them like a big long email of, hey, here's the things that you still have left to do. And then follow that up with a text that says, hey, I just sent an email to your Gmail account. Make sure that you're checking that. So that they're able to really kind of like know that they're expecting something, but I'm not worried about like how much am I trying to fit into this text message or something like that.
Yeah, I remember working with students. It's hard. They have to read. It's like a whole thing. And so I think that's part of it, right? You give them maybe you send them a long thing, or you get them to read the instructions on anything, whether it's resetting a password or just logging in, but a text message is short and sweet and, kind of hopefully gets them to where they need to go.
The amount of teams that we see send a simple text message after an email that says, hey, I sent you something via email you need to read, that actually gets a student to do that. We all know email is the official channel that institutions have, but for some reason it's not the default for students to even think about that. So yeah, something as simple as that can really help. All three of your institutions have been texting for quite some time. This next question comes in wondering maybe what's one thing you wish you knew when you first started texting students, and how has your texting strategy evolved over the time that you've been leveraging it?
I think one thing I wish I knew, and now that I've had been doing this for quite a long time, is people feel like they can say anything over text and they don't expect even, 10 years ago, I don't know if they realized a real person was behind those text messages and was reading those responses. Like I alluded to before, you get the unsubscribes, you get the stops. Most of them are just as simple as that. Others are quite colorful. And, it's like if you had told us you were no longer interested before, you would no longer get these text messages. So I wish I knew what to expect when texting became a prevalent form of communication. Now that I've done it, and new people come into the office and they are starting to use the platform, I warn them. I'm like, don't take it personally. They are not talking to you. They are just talking to talk. It's one of those things. Um, but it's also texting has kind of forced us, I guess, really in a way to evaluate. I think back to, what Brandon was saying, how much you send in a text message versus how much you send in an email. Because again, when people were just picking up their phones and doing one-off texts, it was paragraph after paragraph in a text message. I was like, I try to like tell people, would you read something like this? No. Well, then why do you expect an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old, whatever age to do it, or even a parent? I'm like, I send you a message as a staff member. You wouldn't want to read this. You'd like tune out after the second sentence. So why are you expecting a student to do it just because you want to send one message and be done? It's trying to, retrain ourselves how much is appropriate. And, hey, send a short message that says, I sent you an email, or go check out our website. You'll get more information there. That's all that's what we need to do. If there's more pointed things we have to do, yes, you have to get a little bit more, I'll say lengthy, but within reason. 2 sentences, 3 max. But it's forced us to kind of retrain our brains as to how we actually communicate and talk to people over these different mediums. So it's definitely been a ride for the past, 10 years.
And it's been interesting too to watch the shift in the student as well of how they've responded to things, and if you're able to kind of keep up with that and change your strategy based off what students are looking at, it definitely helps in the long run.
And from a higher ed perspective, right? How we speak in an email is different than how we should be speaking in text messages. I've had to change myself to talk like an 18-year-old in a text message versus how I would write a report or an email to, my vice president or something like that. I'll text, I'll forget what I'm doing. And I'll be like, oh crap, sorry, I didn't mean that. That was for you. And it's definitely the way students talk to each other, and, how we've had to shift our, our vernacular as well. It's very interesting.
Anything, Brandon or Tony, that you want to add to that on things you wish you would have known when you first started texting?
I think that I was just going to piggyback off of like the last thing that you said there, Lori, that like having our like new admission reps when we're going through training, like reminding them that they can have like their real voice be in those texting communication elements. Like that's something that we didn't really kind of do at the very start. But as our kind of younger admission reps started coming on board, they were really kind of doing that more naturally. And I've been learning from them a little bit more and letting them sort of like kind of lead the charge in how they do the mass communications, or how they might, be a little bit more like appealing in certain messaging. When we have one text message thread that goes like really well for someone, we will share it in like our team chat. And it's not uncommon for someone else to say, oh, I just copied that and it worked really well for me too, or something like that.
Absolutely.
For me, I think one of the learning curves was I've never anticipated how much these students could think they could accomplish via text. They will text us and want to have these lengthy, in-depth, complicated conversations about these processes that really are not appropriate via text message or even possible. Thankfully, Mongoose doesn't have the character limit that Slate has for text, so we can have some longer conversations, but I can't walk you through step by step of everything and filling out the FAFSA via text. So being able to then go back to the student and say, like, I'm happy to help with this piece, but for this other piece, do you mind if we just schedule a time to actually talk on the phone, or set up a Zoom call so that we can talk through this one-on-one, because text really isn't the right platform for it.
Absolutely. Well, again, all three of you, Brandon, Lori, and Tony, we have really appreciated your insight and willingness to jump on and talk through some of these things with us today, and hope that everybody was able to learn a little bit more about use cases within there. Before letting everyone go, we want to make sure that we keep you up to date on all of our future Mongoose user groups, our upcoming sessions. We've got one in July, kind of melt prevention, as we're moving into the summer for enrollment focus. That's definitely a huge topic of interest. And then tell your advancement friends that in August, we're going to have one specifically around kind of advancement engagement for homecoming and giving campaigns. So, as always, we really appreciate everybody's attendance on these. And also want to make you aware of our new AI agents and our inbox assistant. And I know we talked a little bit about the future, how AI is coming into it. And that's an area Mongoose is also developing some places out. So inbox assistants really allow you to have still that personal one-to-one connection with students, but the AI is able to take some of that lift off of your staff. So after hours, or if you're in meetings all day, or if you're traveling, having an inbox assistant that's able to respond to students in real time with that same empathy, that same tone that you expect your staff members to have, really is a huge lift off of your staff's plate. So definitely reach out to your customer success team about these. They'd be happy to show you kind of a full scale demo and what that could look like for the future of your institution. Zainab, I'm going to turn it over to you for any final thoughts before we break for the day.
I don't think I have anything today. I think everyone is excited. And if you guys ever have any questions, definitely reach out to your CSM, reach out to me, reach out to Mike. We can help you go over your data, strategies, just talk about how to text your students a little bit better and utilizing both Slate and Mongoose in tandem. I really appreciate everyone being here today and, taking this Thursday afternoon and hanging out with us.